Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I want to welcome you, Sheikha Maryam, for joining me as well, and also joining and addressing our audience and the world at large. I wanted to take this opportunity to touch base with you. We've had a few conversations in the last few days, and we tend to stay in touch. And I wanted to just take this opportunity to bring your voice on board in light of, I suppose, what's happening in the world on many levels and in many different domains. And so that we can essentially have a conversation, maybe hopefully God willing, inshallah ta'ala, with God's grace, offer some value and some benefit to our community. So welcome, Sheikha Maryam.
Thank you.
Okay. If you like, maybe perhaps we can begin if you wanted to recite a Surah Fatiha or so we can begin.
A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. Maliki yawmiddin. Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'in. Ihdina siratal mustaqim. Siratal ladhina an'amta alayhim. Ghayril maghdubi alayhim. Waladallin. Ameen.
Allahumma salli ala Sayyid Muhammad wa ala Sayyid Muhammad. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد الصلاة الفاتحة لما أغلق والخاتم لما سبق ناصر الله حق بالحق والحادي إلى صراطك المستقيم وعلى آله وصحبه حق قدره ومقداره العظيم. I want to thank you for your recitation, Sheikha Maryam, and we begin with the blessings of Surah Fatiha and also salawat on our Prophet ﷺ, that Allah Almighty may provide to us an opening of fath. And that term fath is oftentimes synonymous with victory. So may Allah provide us an opening and victory both over the darkness within ourselves and in our environment and in our world. And that He, subhanahu wa ta'ala, guide our conversations. Now we have maybe perhaps our intention in terms of where we want to go with this, what we intend to perhaps touch on and speak about, but really I am praying and we're praying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides this conversation to be of the best use and benefit to everyone that is been guided to witnessing and sharing this with us. So thank you again, Sheikha Maryam, for joining us. I think I would like to begin maybe by asking you, you've been on the path for a long time, and you've been in the world for, mashallah, you were around in the 60s when a lot of the civil rights movements were taking place. And I think you were quite active in that regard, even throughout your entire life, in terms of standing up for human justice. And ultimately, your quest for truth led you throughout the world and eventually guided you to the feet of great spiritual masters who have essentially transcended the suffering, the strife, the conflict that plagues the rest of humanity, the bulk of humanity. What is coming up for you, Sheikha Maryam, in terms of perhaps sharing from your experience, your travels, your journeys, your path, your life, that you think is important for people to hear now, especially in light of what's happening with the great economic disparity that human beings are facing, the racial injustice and inequality, the political instability, and in addition to the health crisis?
Well, we were all created by one infinitely merciful being, the Lord of all. So this would be, as we have begun this discussion, this is our guidance, the light of guidance that will show us the answer to every question, and specifically and deeply questions that we have no other answer for. We can't find the answer to these endemic problems that are manifesting except by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who created us all for a purpose, and that purpose is to love, to worship, and to serve. So it's through service and love and worship that we say in Arabic is ibadah, that the answer will come. And there are many, each one of us has a different way of manifesting that that amazing faculty that we have been given. So each person who's listening to this has the capacity to serve in a different way. And instead of feeling hopeless and blocked and paralyzed, we need to beseech the one who created us all to empower us, to enliven us, to guide us on the journey to accomplish this purpose. And in each period of our life, it manifests in a different way. It may manifest in a different way. It may be very, very consistent. But at this very moment, we need that flow of barakah, the blessing, to come through us, so that we may, each and all of us who are thinking this way, become like a sanctuary of peace. Become like a sanctuary of peace where, whether we are inside or outside, and now we're more inside, people from around the world, all races, all ethnicities, may find refuge in this heart. So there's one level of activism that has to do with manifesting physically, and then there's the dimension which is spiritual activism. And I would say that's what I've been dedicated to, and those who have taught me have been dedicated to.
Yeah.
And so the more that we experience what that's about, you've got to experience it. In other words, may our prayers come to life. May our love manifest in the middle of everything. The love of God for us come through us to awaken that love in others. And this is the subtle realm in which the divine assembly is manifesting. It's not what you see on the news. It's another entirely different dimension that can empower humanity to make the paradigm shift with all that is on the table right now. In other words, each kind of injustice that is manifesting, rightfully so, may be addressed in different ways by each of us. It may or may not be necessary to go into the street, but we have to answer the challenge by rising up individually and collectively to present another dimension of being, of communion, of connectedness. And it's rather than to divide, to unite. How do we do that? As I've heard recently, a beautiful phrase, that we must unite, build, and gather, not divide, break, and shatter. Understanding that all the people who are going through their traumas right now, very understandably, may be feeling that they're feeling the weight of an extensive shattering process that has occurred throughout human history. And what we're talking about is the healing process.
Yeah. So there's a lot in there, mashallah, that you bring up, and I want to try to maybe actually dive a little bit deeper into some of the things that you mentioned. So first of all, there's this idea of rising up is coming up, right, in our just general language. But there's this interesting paradigm, right? You mentioned a paradigm shift in which we can look to the example of the prophets of God, the messengers of the divine, who really were sent to guide humanity to peace, to stability, to harmony, and ultimately to happiness, to success, ultimately to paradise. There is this prophetic idea, first of all, that what we're experiencing in this world and in this life is a foreshadowing and a taste of what we're going to experience in the afterlife. So if we are creating for ourselves a world of trauma and suffering and bitterness and pain and sorrow, that's probably what we're heading towards in a more deeper manifestation in the eternity, in akhirah. So we have to really take a lot of responsibility in terms of what kind of world we're creating now. But this idea of rising up, and the fact that actually begins first and foremost within ourselves. Before we can rise up outwardly, we have to first make sure that we've risen up inwardly. And I think this is why the Prophet of Allah ﷺ placed so much emphasis on jihad al-nafs, jihad al-akbar, before jihad on the outer level, because he wanted to ensure that before anybody was to take action on the physical plane, to make sure that their heart and soul, that their being was first purified of the very things that they were seeking to defend themselves from and fight against, lest we become the very thing that we are protesting against, right? Because it's very easy when the self is not purified to become, and we see this throughout human history, where the victim becomes the oppressor. And that's always a danger. And we've seen this play out throughout human history. So I wanted to maybe address or allow you the opportunity to speak a little bit more on the importance of this inner work and really the source, which you mentioned, of healing and of transformation and of transcendence of this world of problems and the problems that we create at this level of consciousness. The source of relief from that being a connection to the Creator through love, through worship, and that then leads to harmony as well between human beings. How do all of these things connect, Sheikha Maryam?
Mm-hmm. I think that we have to beseech our beloved Lord for guidance, each and every one of us, as insofar as we're inspired to do so. There are people who may not be inspired to do that, and they're making the journey in the way that they can, in the way that they feel is just. Okay, we have to. One of the things that our teachers have told us is that we have to learn to love all lives as our own. Start with our own life. If we're going to love others, we have to start by loving ourselves. That is, by loving the creation that God made us to be. In other words, letting love bloom within the garden and recover us, restore us from what everybody shares, a bulk of unhealed trauma. So it's a spiritual journey that you have to face your unhealed traumas. Each one of us has them. Each one of us has intergenerational memories that need to be healed. Mm-hmm. So in the case of my origin, my ethnic origin, there were wounds that my relatives went through, experienced, that to some degree were passed on to me. And I understand how much this is the case with my brothers and sisters who are with African American or that are African American with an African origin. I, in the course of my journey, was guided to so many amazing, truly blessed realms, both externally and internally. And one of the most important places I was ever guided to, because I didn't choose where I was going, was to West Africa, mm-hmm. where I went. I was guided to go 17 times. There was a reason for that. And I believe that the reason was to bring unity to life between us all. And it was an exalted experience every time. Now, one of the things that is very known to happen, and I heard it myself, countless hours going on in different parts of West Africa, Senegal and Gambia, is the sound of zikr. Mm-hmm. The zikr is flooding through the land day and night. What a wonder. What a wonder it is to hear that. And why is the land at this time really, I never saw any conflict going on there. I may not have seen it, it may have happened, but I saw a great amount of peace and I felt it. Mm-hmm. I felt so united with the human family there. That's why I just kept going back. I felt so at home. Yeah. I also felt this in India in earlier journeys. I felt it very much in Kashmir, India. And now it's not like that. It's so challenging for them, but I will never forget the zikr that went on throughout the early morning hours in Kashmir. So I'm going to answer that by saying that zikr, that is remembrance of Allah, and particularly when it's manifested collectively in such beautiful ways as we have participated in around the world, is a great healing force. And it's also very healing internally. So one of the things that I do throughout my days and nights is a great abundance of remembrance. Mm-hmm. Remembrance of the source of love, the source of wisdom, the source of healing. And if the more and more people around the world that do this, the more the world will be in the process of healing. I was just told recently, maybe a few days ago, that some saint, some person of wisdom was saying, if everybody did such and such a zikr, Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakil, ni'mal mawla wa ni'mal nasir, for example, 450 times a day, that would be a great healing for the world. And so it's when I hear something like that, I do it immediately. And in any case, what I learned from all of the great beings that I was guided to meet is to continuously surrender to Allah and make zikr in remembrance and make our prayers real. When we bow down to the source of all, truly give our lives up, truly let go of our sense that we're in charge of whatever we're asking for to be accomplished. So we have this dua, which we are making for the whole entire world, for every person everywhere that is suffering, is struggling. And the source of all, the master of all, hears the one who calls. I'm not calling and saying, please help me, because I feel so blessed, so sustained. I'm so aware that the sustenance is pouring down upon me. But I want to share that with people all over the planet, each one going through their own process of both struggle and hopefully healing, transformation. So it's a collective process, but it's also an individual process, because you actually cannot help anyone unless you go through the journey yourself.
MashaAllah. When we look at the teachings of the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the messengers of God, he often spoke about and advised his companions to seek refuge from anger, and that anger is essentially fire. He equated it with fire, something that destroys and consumes, and the opposite of that being love, being almost as water, and perhaps we can say the water of life, al-hayat. That love is literally the water that we require as sustenance, and that we are seeking personally for ourselves. You're also pointing out that the source of that love, first and foremost, is God, is the creator, the divine presence of Allah Almighty. To first seek that source of love and to nourish ourselves with that love, first and foremost, our own beings, so that then we can be able to provide to others, inshallah ta'ala, that love. There's an interesting, profoundly powerful verse of the Quran in which Allah is explaining to the angels that He's going to create a new deputy, new creation on the earth. And the angels ask, "Oh, our Lord, are you going to create this creature that will spill blood and cause corruption within the earth, while we glorify your praises and sing thy hymns?" And Allah Almighty says, "I know what you know not." So the angels were seeing sort of one aspect of the human self, the nafs, and how that would manifest and result. And yet Allah is pointing to something greater that is possible within the human being, and that is really the purpose of our creation. What would you say is the major impediment to the experience of love individually within ourselves, and also then collectively as that manifests in the world, in our relationship with other human beings, especially with the other, with those who we perceive to be different from ourselves?
Well, certainly fear, anxiety are major elements that have to be overcome. But the way that it becomes possible to overcome them is through the love, through the understanding that in fact, let's get this off. The understanding that we were all created to be one.
Yeah.
By the one.
Yes.
We have It's called in Arabic Tawheed.
Mm-hmm.
The Tawheed is that which unites us. Now, early on in the plan, close to what you just read about, very important timing, was the appearance of the force that is there to divide.
Yeah.
The force that came up right at that point. Shaitan appeared and refused to bow down to the will of God, to the manifestation of God's will. That's the source of conflict. So within each person, we need to separate these aspects of our consciousness. And for instance, we say in Arabic, A'udhu billahi minash shaitan nirajim. I seek refuge in Allah from the accursed shaitan or Satan. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of Allah, the merciful, the compassionate. So everything is in those two phrases, particularly in the context of that force that appeared very close to the beginning of human history.
Yeah.
Its purpose was to try to distract us, to pull us into that darkness. So right now, it doesn't matter what form the darkness is taking, we need to take refuge in the one of infinite mercy and compassion from the force which will divide us, which does divide us. And it doesn't only divide us from others, it divides us from ourselves. It divides us within ourselves.
Mm.
And that's what causes what we call conflict.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the things that we're looking for, techniques, conflict resolution. And that exists on so many different levels. So one phrase that I appreciate is, "O physician, heal thyself." And each one of us is potentially a healer of humanity. But we have to discover within ourselves what is causing the unrest. What have we submitted to? What have we surrendered to that is causing us to feel anxiety and to be angry, and overcome this tendency by something so much more powerful within us, which is divine love, the love of God that is inherent in us. How could we see if that wasn't flowing through our eyes? How could our heart beat if that love of God wasn't making the heart beat and keeping the heart alive and filling it with love, in God willing, and then keeping the blood flowing? What a miracle we are, made by our Creator, most merciful. We need to explore this being that we are and see how the Creator made us and how He, or the one of infinite grace, is functioning within us. And what does He want us to do? What is He telling us to do? What is He guiding us to do? To make peace on earth and make peace within the earth within us, within the sky within us, in the oceans of grace within us. We have to come to know ourselves as a divine creation. Mm-hmm. And then sort out what is coming from the satanic side, what is trying to break things apart. Because I would say there is a war going on, but it's not a war that we have to be fighters in, except relating to what you said, fight the inner war. But this war is not going to be won with weapons and with anger and, force. It's the force only of faith that will dispel those elements within us which are agitated, which are angry. And so it's a matter of, and what the great teachers, all the prophets, peace and blessings be upon them, and those, their inheritors, the spiritual masters who bring the transmission through the ages so blessedly to us. They're telling us the same thing that the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, told those who were with him, and all those who came into contact with him, millions upon millions of people throughout the ages that have joined together in this assembly. It's also important to realize that the prayers of all those beings who lived before are alive now, as they are alive in their living witnessing. And we need to like tune in to that assembly. And that's what I find to be so sustaining and guiding to me. What I found in those countries that I mentioned, for example, Senegal, is that the zikr, the remembrance that's going on, it's usually happening in beautiful, beautiful songs of grace, is connecting directly to the unseen realms where the unseen beings are making that zikr. So we all unite together in a place where sadness disappears, where the idea that anything is hopeless disappears, because we're here, we came into existence for this purpose. The more that you focus on that, the more that we focus on that, the more that our homes, where we are living now, most of the time, become sanctuaries of peace, and they become places where the divine beings gather within ourselves, within our homes. And so we can become empowered by being a part of that congregation to rise up. I think that was your question. Yeah. How do we rise up? And this is one dimension of an answer to that.
Yeah, mashallah. You know, in a lot of the conversation and a lot of the challenges and troubles and hardships and problems that we face in the world, you're pointing out the importance of seeking divine will, or the wisdom of divine will within all of that. What is God's will with regards to these problems and challenges that we may be facing as human beings, individually and collectively? Do you think, and again, I've been trying to emphasize this more recently as well, but the idea that no matter how clever we think we are and how intelligent we may think we are, would you speak for a moment to the fact that we're not going to be able to solve our problems except through divine support and divine will, and that this is the way the universe is set up? The degree to which we keep moving away from the remembrance of God, we will actually end up more into a world that is a manifestation of the absence of the remembrance and the presence of God, which by definition becomes a world that increasingly begins to resemble hellfire rather than paradise.
Right. Absolutely clear. It is interesting to note in the Holy Quran that the problematic elements will appear in the Quranic passage, saying that if people do not submit to the will of the one most merciful and most powerful and great, and instead they do countless different things that are counterproductive in the deepest sense, and in that sense establish a more or less hellish mentality, or let's call it distracted and oriented, misguided mentality, there will be a result to that. We're shown what the result is if you do that. If you deny the divine presence and choose to be dishonest, to promote your own agenda, whatever that may be, which may be counter to the higher good, there will be a certain result to that. Almost always the next phrase will be, but for those who do surrender and give their lives back to the source willingly and with the deepest intention to serve appropriately as he wills, there will be gardens with so many wonderful things in those gardens. And it goes on to tell us we're always guided to hear these beautiful things. One of the beautiful passages in Surat al-Waqiyah is that in those gardens you will be sitting facing your companions and on green, emerald couches, on celestial couches. And what are you saying to each other? What are we saying to each other? Peace, peace, peace. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is showing us that if we, let's say, we live in peace in relation to our Lord, the result of what will come to us is peace.
Yeah.
And that's why we are focusing on how to become peacemakers in the midst of an apparent world of war. This is an appearance of war. It doesn't mean that what each person has suffered throughout their individual or collective history isn't a real pain. It is, to the degree that they feel that it is. So as a peacemaker, our intention would be to help heal those wounds. And I've had the experience, we just came through Ramadan in a very unique way this year. I've never experienced it like this. I've never received more calls from people in different parts of the world going through unique traumas and asking for help. I've also never seen people responding more rapidly to the healing process, letting go of very serious lifelong traumas and like becoming so joyous at discovering that life is not going to inevitably be like that for them.
Mm-hmm.
They have a very big option to continuing to let that trauma go on and on. And one thing that's important is to realize that the traumas you have are coming from the projection of another person's unhealed trauma. So what's happening out in the streets is so unjust. The person, and we also find in the Quran that it tells us to bless the oppressor as well as the oppressed. Help the oppressor as well as the oppressed. This shows us that human history is composed of a complex series of dark forces intermingling in people and taking different forms. Now, when a person strikes against an innocent person in an absolutely unjust and cruel way, that is the manifestation of a very serious unhealed trauma in that person. And if we looked at the whole history of mankind, and every type of cruelty that has ever come to pass is like that. How could a person do it if they knew how bad it is to do it, to hurt another being? If you hurt one person, you hurt all of humanity. If you kill one person, it's like killing all of humanity. How can people at the heads of state, as they are today, do that as though they're here to save the nation, because they haven't awakened, they haven't heard the call to care, the call to love all lives as our own. But everyone who's hearing that call, everyone who listens to this interview or any other interview like this and says, yes, I am one of this group. Let me be a part of the cure. Let me be part of the cure. Then that person needs to, in their own way of prayer, ask the source of all healing power and the source of every good thing that we could possibly do to inspire us with that power, with that manifestation of his love and power that will help even one life, then the next life. Think that all lives are precious, so we're not really talking about one group that matters. Everyone matters. And Black lives definitely matter. Of course, I myself have been dedicated to this all my life, but so do every other life, whatever color you think you are. And I've traveled in so many countries with people of so many colors. Did anyone treat me as being a stranger? No. Did they ever think, here's a white person here, we can't talk to her? Never. I was in West Africa in a huge assembly of mostly women, but not entirely, to remember the great saints of West Africa, specifically Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba, radiallahu anhu. And 3 so-called white women were sitting there, myself and my 2 sisters, and singing qasidas and speaking about what an amazing transmission came through this man and the mother who bore him and all those who followed him. And as we were invoking that, so much honor and love was bestowed upon us by our sisters, mostly sisters and brothers of African origin. And my feeling at the time is, when our beloved friends and brothers and sisters from Africa were brought here, why didn't we treat them like that? Make an assembly and honor them rather than all the things that were done to them. Now, the sense of great respect and love that was shown to us, and it was shown to me all around my travels through Africa and India, is a message for humanity. And it's a message for me to share based on my humble experience, that every life counts, that every single person can love another life and go completely transcend the idea that we're different based upon the color of our skin, or our ethnicity, or where our ancestors came from. I never got a DNA test because it doesn't matter to me. And people ask me, they just can't understand, where am I from? They say, where do you come from? I say, from all the places that I've ever been. And I've been to so many amazing places, met so many people. Every one of them is my brother and sister, even if they don't treat me as such. It's because of an unhealed trauma. There's something separating us at that moment, either in them or in me. And so we need to focus individually and collectively on healing those extensive, traumas that start back with Cain and Abel. And prior to that, with, Shaitan and his resistance to surrendering to the infinite bounty and purity and power and truth of Allah's plan.
MashaAllah. I would concur. I mean, I had a beautiful experience in West Africa a couple of years ago when I had the opportunity to travel there with the dear friend and beloved mentor, Imam Fode Drame. We went to West Africa, spent some time in Senegal and Gambia, and everywhere I went, the whole group, was very diverse. A number of them, white Americans and Canadians, converts to Islam. But everywhere we went, we were generously welcomed and hosted in homes, fed with the families that we were with. It was a beautiful experience. And I think this is what Islam is capable of producing, really faith and what it's meant to produce. And you mentioned in terms of unhealed trauma and even the oppressor being a victim of unhealed trauma. Perhaps maybe this is one of the reasons why Jesus, alayhi salam, the great prophet, messenger Jesus, said, love even your enemies. Because the more that we perpetuate the very problem, we're never going to get out of it. We're never going to solve it, which is trauma and unhealed trauma. You come from an interesting background, Sheikha Maryam. You were, born and raised in Southern California, Jewish background, Jewish heritage, and yet you found in your quest for truth ultimately the path leading to the footsteps of great saints and pious men and women of God, and specifically within Islam, even though you traveled all over the world. What do you think is now the great challenge for people to look towards religion? Because, religion is so denigrated in our modern culture for whatever reason. And is that accurate? Is that an accurate portrayal and representation of faith and faith-based traditions, specifically the monotheistic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam? What do you think is the reason, or what would you say about this great challenge for people to look to faith, again, as the source for solutions? Because again, it's so portrayed, in a very negative way in modern culture. But yet for you, again, having been a young woman growing up in the United States of all places, coming to Islam, that didn't stop you.
There was a point in my journey after I received an amazing amount of guidance right here in America in unexpected ways and places from my very earliest days, that I had to leave this modern world. But I'm going to go back now that I just remembered. When I was young, my father and mother were divorced, and we used to take long trips with my dad to Palm Springs, where his family had a hotel. he sang throughout the trips such a song such as one that I'll sing a little bit. If we could consider each other a neighbor, a friend, or a brother, it could be a wonderful, wonderful world. It could be a wonderful world. Oh yes, it could be a wonderful world. If there were no poor and the rich were content, if strangers were welcome wherever they went, if each of us knew what true brotherhood meant, it could be a wonderful world. Oh yes, it could be a wonderful world. So as I was growing up on these journeys, I came to love to travel. Why? Because those were the messages that came during those trips. And it continued to manifest throughout my life. The very words that I heard as a young child were ripening within me. They were seeds of truth, awakening that consciousness. I want to say this right now about parents wondering what to do with their kids, how to get your kids on the journey in a good way, in a way that will bring them to the highest state. And I'll just say, you could follow the example of my dad, who just sang songs like that. But it was really the grace of God within me that heard the song, that because Allah willed me to hear that song and to understand where that song was leading. Where is that song leading? So as it went on throughout the ages of my journey, I kept finding manifestations of that grace in so many different situations, almost everywhere I went. Why? Because the seed was planted in the garden. And it's not that my dad planted it. God planted that seed. Allah, who created me, before I came into this world, before we all came here, we were together in an assembly of souls proclaiming the truth, the ultimate truth of our Creator, infinitely merciful. And all the divine qualities are those that guide us now, that guide us step by step. So suppose that someone does something to you that is challenging. Dispel what is bad with what is better. Respond to what is bad with what is better, Holy Quran says. The Holy Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, responded to those who attacked him, who were so cruel to him. When asked by the angel, should we destroy them all? He said, no. Protect them, because from their loins may spring true believers. Now, let's say instead of thinking that whoever does something to you is an avowed enemy and you should strike back and be angry, instead contemplate the possibility that the person has buried within them, below this unhealed trauma, something very sacred. In fact, everyone does. The sacred seeds are within everyone. So how do we make peace with someone who looked like an enemy, who appeared to be an enemy? It's by loving God more and asking the source of love to heal that person instead of to destroy them.
Yeah.
To help them.
I remember a beautiful example from the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and blessings be upon him and upon all the messengers of God, in which the companions felt so oppressed that they asked him, "O Messenger of God, pray to Allah to curse these unbelievers, to destroy them." And he sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "I was not sent to curse. I'm not sent for that." And through his beautiful and prophetic example, and really through the prophetic example of all of the messengers of God, we saw what was possible: harmony and unity and love and oneness between human beings, and really perhaps most clearly in Islam. So I would say, I really want to thank you for sharing that perspective and adding to the voice, calling human beings back to their Lord and Creator as the source of these solutions for the challenges that we're facing as human beings, again, both individually and collectively. I love the way how you, in this sort of greater context, are also making this very relevant to the average human being sitting in their home and perhaps struggling with their children or with their spouse, relatives or neighbors or work associates or anything else. Because everything is a reflection and a microcosm of the macro. So what's happening inside of our homes is actually what's happening outside. And this conflict that we see on the global stage, you know, its origin, as you pointed out, was the conflict between Cain and Abel, between two brothers that came from the same father, who fought, or one fought and killed the other. And so the Prophet of Allah in his farewell sermon said, "Oh, human beings, your God is one and your father is one," reminding us that we're from one human family. We're all brothers and sisters, as you've been pointing out throughout this session. MashaAllah, thank you, Sheikha Maryam, for this beautiful and really insightful and healing conversation. I wanted to maybe conclude with asking you, you've spoken a lot about the importance of going back to prayer and to worship and to remembrance, almost as a healing balm for our souls and also for our world. What would you suggest for those who are Muslim and those who are not, perhaps, who may be coming across this interview, as concrete and practical steps that they can take to healing trauma in their own lives through the love and the support of the divine, as well as being able to heal some of the pain and suffering in our world?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I want to speak a little bit more about the example of Sheikh Ahmad Dubamba, radiallahu anhu, who was taken into exile, who was taken into imprisonment for many, many years by French colonialists of the time. And they saw in him not only the danger of his resistance to their power, but of his capacity to influence others to do the same. But like other great examples of our time, such as Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., Gandhi, and others, they form a kind of collective of beings who have walked on the face of the earth like the prophets did before. Peace and blessings be upon them. And if you look at his qasidas, those songs that he sang, most of them are filled with gratitude. While he was in the most difficult of circumstances, imprisoned, and I have traveled to places where he lived in, isolation and was held captive. And the ground is very rocky and very difficult. And he walked on the ground, and the snakes could eat his feet. In whatever situations he was in, the conditions were beyond our comprehension that he endured. He was not discouraged. He did not become angry.
Yeah.
He guided us on the journey to total transformation of our consciousness. And I have been on the journey celebrating not his release from bondage, but even his imprisonment that is celebrated in Senegal, Touba. And there are countless, uncountable numbers of beings on those roads. In cars, people standing up in trucks just to get to the place where he arrived ultimately, the place of his completion of his physical journey. And what came from that, from his, what he left, his legacy, is a very large population of very inspired people filled with faith. One man did this. What about the Holy Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, having endured so much, having been so persecuted throughout certain periods of his life, leaving a legacy that billions of people have been blessed by? That tells us every person has such a capacity to do something to leave a legacy no matter what the trial that you faced. So instead of leaving a legacy of bitterness, since you've faced this difficulty, these series of difficulties, follow the example of these great beings that Allah has manifested on earth for a very definitive purpose, to guide us on the journey. And so now each person listening to this, whatever the religion may be, or not, perhaps the word religion itself is discolored. It's not like radiantly clear because it's been misinterpreted by power forces in many cases. When you see certain religions after the originator brought the religion to this world, it could have been very distorted. It's no longer the same thing. It could be the opposite of what the prophet brought. Peace and blessings be upon each and all of them. So our goal, I know for myself, I was brought up in a very liberal home. We didn't have any practicing religion. But at a very early age, I was told in a beautiful way to seek the truth, and the truth would set me free. And I didn't choose that message. That message was sent. Now, each person has to look at their life journey and try to remember the messages that have been sent from the highest, most blessed dimensions of existence. It may even be one message, or the message may be coming now. If you haven't received it yet, you could get it now. The message is to fulfill the purpose for which you were created. Is that to be angry? That's not the purpose that we were created for. But the anger is there as a step, a stepping stone to freedom from anger, freedom from pain. All of this is about pain. That's what we call unhealed trauma. So now, in the course of your life, you have certain experiences that were challenging and painful and difficult. And then, on the other hand, we have great help coming to us, and that is called which told to us in the surah, which tells us, surely with the difficulty comes the ease. So as you're doing your self-healing or you're helping another, you have to see that even when you're analyzing that you have a difficulty, there's something right in the center of that is what Allah has given you to liberate you from the difficulty. That's the blessing. The ease is the blessing. The ease is the life, love, source of your true existence that can free you from your limited form, your limited identity, that brings you into a wholly different perspective of who you really are. So as we make this journey, it's a journey. You know, what I often tell people is, I want to give you my phone number if you need to talk to someone at any time, you know. And I heard somebody say this a few days ago, advising people to have a mentor or a helper, you know, to call. And I don't want anyone to feel isolated and unable to ask for help. Now, if there's no one there to ask, know that your beloved Lord is there, is here. And he says to us in many different ways, I hear the one who calls me. I hear the one who calls me. And he tells us that he's nearer to us than our jugular vein, than our very, the essence of our existence. He's nearer to us. So wherever you are, in any place in your journey, that is the answer. It's to go back to the source of love and healing and guidance, to find out the purpose for your existence and how to transcend the trauma and get on that path that leads to victory for us all. The opening.
Wafat. I mean, beautiful, Sheikha Maryam. Perfect message for us to really end with, because, and also a beautiful way to look at the example of the prophets of God and the hardships and difficulties they went through, as well as the pious throughout the centuries. Notably, the example of Ahmed Dubama Sheikh Ahmed Dubama that you were mentioning, radiallahu anhu. in the sense that they used their hardships and difficulties, their pain and their suffering as a means for transformation and to transmute that's hardship and that difficulty into something that can then elevate us into a greater level of consciousness and a greater level of light within our souls. I believe this is why Rumi said, the wound is where the light enters you. And sometimes perhaps we can see the hardships that we face in the world, not just as trials, but also within them being hidden blessings. As you mentioned, the ayah in the Quran, Surah Shar, فَإِنَّ مَعَ الْأُسْرِ يُسْرًا إِنَّ مَعَ الْأُسْرِ. With that hardship comes expansion, opening, ease, and God-willing blessings. Thank you, Sheikha Maryam, for sharing this this moment with us, this conversation. Inshallah, I'm sure that our audience will value and appreciate. And I would like to just maybe invite you to conclude with a dua, with a supplication that's coming from your heart, inshallah, for everyone.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله وهو العلي العظيم سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله وهو العلي العظيم سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله وهو العلي العظيم.
Ameen.
O Allah, most merciful and compassionate, our beloved one, our source, unite us in your light, O Lord. Reveal to us your presence in us, individually and collectively. Bring us together in your presence, in your mercy, in your love, that we may all join together to manifest your will, your merciful will. May we walk in the footsteps of our beloved prophets, peace and blessings be upon them, and our beloved Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who came into existence as mercy for all the worlds. Let us walk in this world and all worlds as a manifestation of that mercy and that light. Ameen, ameen, ya Rabbil Alameen.
Thank you, Sheikha Maryam. It's been a pleasure to see you again and to share this moment with you. Jazakallah khairun.
Thank you very much, dear, for all the beautiful work that is flowing through you.
Ameen.
Ameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu to everyone, everywhere who hears this. And we pray for each one of you to come into the blessed state of knowing your true self and walking on the journey in light and peace. Ameen.
Ameen. Alhamdulillah.